One. Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. We are creeping closer and closer to the start of the NBA season, but we still have some big dominoes that are left to fall. The biggest, perhaps, is what's going to happen with Ben Simmons and the Philadelphia 76ers. Nothing good, because the situation continues to deteriorate. We've given updates, Sap, periodically throughout the offseason. But now we're hearing reports that Ben Simmons has directly told the Sixers, trade me. I'm not going to show up to camp. I don't want to be here anymore, and sort of forcing their hand even further. We knew that he obviously wasn't happy with the situation there. He hasn't been talking to the team. In fact, this is the first thing he's really said to them. So any surprise, Sap, that it's come to this?
No, I think his days are numbered with the Philadelphia 76ers. I don't think he wears their uniform again. He's not going to report to training camp. That's the latest coming from Ben Simmons. And we know he has a high-powered agent, Clutch Sports, led by Rich Paul, the most powerful agency in the NBA right now. And I think they've made it known that Ben Simmons wants out of Philadelphia. A little bit different than what took place last year with James Harden, who did show up to training camp and play the first 3-4 weeks with the Houston Rockets, albeit completely out of shape, forced his way out of Houston, got to Brooklyn. With Ben Simmons, he's being adamant right now that he's not going to show up to training camp. So the Philadelphia 76ers are to blame for this as well, because of the way they handled the end of the playoffs last year. Unless they're just stupid, or unless they had some sort of grand scheme that they're trying to cook up, why would Doc Rivers, when asked after the playoff loss to Atlanta in 7 games, he was asked, do you think that you could be a championship caliber team with Ben Simmons as your point guard? And Doc Rivers says, I don't know if I can answer that right now. I mean, what? So you've just devalued the player. And then, of course, you got Joel Embiid, who, when asked what was the turning point in Game 7, said, well, when we had a layup and we turned it down for 2 free throws, we hit one, and we never really recovered from that. And that was a play in which, of course, Ben Simmons had a uncontested dunk, which would have tied the game up. Who knows what would have happened at that point? Instead, they got 1 free throw, not from Ben Simmons. I believe it was Matisse Thybulle, who got fouled and hit 1 of 2. I mean, I get that was a big play, but the 76ers couldn't recover from that. They were down 1 at that point. Joel Embiid sucked in the 4th quarter of that game. So, I mean, and he essentially blamed Ben Simmons. So your best player, Joel Embiid, and your head coach, Doc Rivers, never supported Ben Simmons. So now his trade value has gone down, and they're going to have to try to get as much as they can. I think he's as good as gone.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems that way. But Sap, don't you? I mean, I think that sometimes, especially after a tough loss, it's hard to think of the okay, well, this hurt Ben Simmons' trade value and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So I feel like you're a guy who appreciates honest answers, Sap, and I feel like that was a really honest answer from Doc Rivers at the time.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, we love it. Look, I mean, Aaron Rodgers is my favorite football player because when he gets asked a question, he generally answers it. He has no filter. I love that about him. We get that a lot in the NBA, although the NBA can be somewhat passive-aggressive among its superstars. Most notably, LeBron James is the most passive-aggressive of all professional athletes. I love that part of it because it gives us something to talk about. But how did that benefit the organization when you've devalued a player that wants out of there and you're going to have to move? So now the rest of the league is looking at it and saying, well, what's going on with Ben Simmons? And look, I think there's a lot of question marks with Ben Simmons, not his ability, but how much does he love basketball? That's a big concern, Jet. Like, we can go through all the top players in the NBA. And look, I think Ben Simmons is a top 20 player. When he's right, he's an elite defender, outstanding passer, excellent rebounder, has an ability to score. I think he could be similar to what Scottie Pippen was, maybe a poor man's version of Scottie Pippen, but he can't shoot, nor does he want to shoot. And I don't know how much he loves playing the game of basketball. Like, what does his offseason consist of? Is it conditioning, which, keeps him in shape, but does he really work on the craft of basketball? Does he work on free throws? Does he work on his outside shot? I doubt it. Or if he does, it's not working at this point. So you wonder if he really loves the game of basketball. Normally, you don't ask that about top players, right? You'll have concerns. Will this guy fit in this organization? Is he healthy? Is he on the back nine of his career? Not necessarily does he love playing basketball. I mean, the other superstar player who might get moved, if not before the season, early in the season, is Dame Lillard. no one questions that Dame Lillard loves playing basketball,
Right.
right? I mean, went to the Olympics. He's a hooper, and I don't get the same feeling with Ben Simmons. So if you're going to put together a deal to go get Ben Simmons, you're getting a player who is flawed, but also you have to question how committed is he to being a top player. And oh, by the way, he has 4 years, $147 million left on his contract. So there's that component as well.
Yeah, and I don't see that he's improved much, if any, since coming into the league,
Right.
which is obviously a massive problem, especially if you're talking about a guy who got a max extension, a guy who was the top overall pick in the draft. I think he's improved a little bit defensively, but I don't know how much that is him working on his game so much as just like he's adapted to the speed of the NBA and sort of like, but he hasn't improved the biggest weaknesses in his game. He does, in fact, he's gotten demonstrably worse at the free throw line somehow. And I think he has a high opinion of himself. And I think that's part of the problem now is he's like, well, why are the Sixers trashing on me? I'm really good at doing this. I was all defensive team and that, but he was obviously the biggest reason why they failed in the playoffs. And anybody who says otherwise, I think, isn't really looking at it. So, Doc Rivers, prior to the comments he made at the end of their loss to the Hawks in that series, all he was doing was complimenting Ben Simmons, saying, I think this guy's great. We can certainly win with him. And I think, at the end, he was just fed up. But that sort of begs the question, Sap, is there an approach that works with Ben Simmons? Pumping his tires doesn't seem to work. Criticizing him seems to alienate him. So, what method really works with this guy? Is there a way to even get through to him as a coach or a team or a franchise? I think that's a serious question right now. And he hasn't done himself any favors by the way he's gone about this offseason, coming off what's been arguably the worst stretch of his basketball in his career in the playoffs.
What may work with him, and I've seen it from time to time, is when he gets pissed off and angry, which isn't very often. He just doesn't have that in his DNA. That's just not the type of guy he is. He's not Russell Westbrook, who, as soon as he shows up on the court, is ready to fight the opponents, sometimes ready to fight his own teammates. But when he gets pissed off, he is so damn talented at 6'10", 250 pounds with point guard skills and, tremendous defensive ability, great instincts for the game, that he can be dominant. But how much do you need to do to get him pissed off? That's the question. I mean, is he going to take these slights from Doc Rivers and Joel Embiid and, force his way out of Philadelphia, and that's going to be a chip on his shoulder for the rest of his career? We talk about the all-time greats, whether it was Michael Jordan and his Hall of Fame speech that was still, trashing his high school coach, or I'm sure when Tom Brady gives his Hall of Fame speech by the year 2035 or 5 years after he retires, whenever that may be, he's going to just go scorched earth because that's what motivates those guys. Ben Simmons is like 180-degree difference than those folks. I mean, he's wildly talented, but I don't know what really motivates him, what kind of makes him become the best he can be. A change of scenery might be, but yeah, that's the biggest question with him. It's not the physical talent, and I think you can kind of fix his shot, but the problems with the shot is mental more than physical. Like we know Giannis has trouble at the free throw line. Giannis has no problem going to the free throw line. Giannis is like the guy that's not in the best shape. I'm not saying Giannis isn't in the best shape, but the guy who's not in the best shape, but still not afraid to wear sleeveless shirts. Or he's not afraid to wear shorts because it's like, hey, I'm in great shape. I don't care. And the guy has my physique, 5'9", 245, but he's proud of it. Giannis can't shoot free throws, but he doesn't care. He'll go take free throws. So there's a difference there between Giannis and Simmons. And also, I will guarantee you that Giannis this offseason, even after winning the championship, will work his ass off to become a better free throw shooter, better mid-range shooter. He never really feels he's a finished product. With Ben Simmons, it's like, look what I've done already. Do I really have to put in more time? I'm already an all-star. I've made defensive all-NBA a couple times. He probably should have been defensive player of the year last year. Rudy Gobert won it. And I think, as we saw in the postseason, even though Ben Simmons was not very good in that Atlanta series, he was good defensively. To go from being what he is to what he can be, that's where you really have to work. It's like a golfer who, is a guy who has an 8 or 9 handicap, but to get up to being a scratch golfer is nearly impossible. It takes a lot of work, dedication, and mental approach. Well, Simmons is kind of there now. He's an all-star, he could probably in his sleep be an all-star, but is he going to become a franchise player? That's the big question. Philadelphia has to move on from him. I can't see him and Joel Embiid coexisting. And now how does Ben Simmons look at Doc Rivers and feel that Doc Rivers has any confidence in him? They're going to have to move him. What can they get in return? That's the big question.
Yeah, I mean, I think all you need to know about the guy like Giannis and Ben Simmons is in the biggest game of Giannis's career in Game 6 of the NBA Finals. He had arguably the best game of his career.
Yep.
In the elimination game against the Hawks, Ben Simmons had one of the worst games of his career.
Exactly.
I mean, that's pretty much all you need to know right there about their compete levels and about where their confidence is at. So he wants out. He's made it difficult now for himself to get traded because between what Doc Rivers and Embiid said, and now Ben Simmons being completely unresponsive, and the first time he's made a comment to the Sixers, talk to them since the season ended, is I'm not showing up for training camp. He's made it so one, they have to trade him, and two, his value is at an all-time low, and it just continues to dip. So the Sixers are in a tough spot. Daryl Morey's a good GM, and he doesn't want to get burned in a trade. But Simmons, the way that this situation has unfolded, has continued to hurt his trade value. So I agree with you, Sap. They have to move him, but I don't know when, because I don't know how low the Sixers are willing to go in terms of accepting an offer for him.
He's mentioned, or someone in his camp has mentioned, that he's interested in playing for 3 California teams. Now, I'm pretty good at geography. Last time I checked, there's 4 teams in California. I would assume that Sacramento's the one he doesn't want to play for because, they're the least high-profile team of the 4 teams in California. That would lead you to believe that he's interested in playing for Golden State, the Clippers, or the Lakers. Golden State makes the most sense. I don't know what the Clippers would have to offer for Ben Simmons other than trading Paul George straight up for Ben Simmons, right?
That'd be a terrible trade for the Clippers.
Because Paul George, who I think has been one of the most scrutinized players in this league for the last decade, busted his ass last year in the playoffs. If he had just hit a couple of, this is a big if he had hit a couple of big free throws, Lord knows that the Clippers may have been playing in the finals even without Kawhi Leonard. And I think if they had Kawhi Leonard, they may have won the championship. Paul George was outstanding in the postseason last year. He is a guy who gives you not quite the defense that Ben Simmons gives you, right? But he's a really good defensive player, but he gives you much more on offense. Yeah, that would be a bad trade for the Clippers to go from Paul George to Ben Simmons. But I don't even think that that's a match. And we don't know what Kawhi is going to be this year, if he's going to miss the entire season or not. The Lakers, they have no way of getting Ben Simmons, right?
No.
Because 90% of their salaries are tied up in 3 players: LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and Russell Westbrook. They have a bunch of veterans on veteran minimums. You're not going to cobble together 7 veterans to go to Philadelphia for Ben Simmons. That just can't work. I'm sure that's probably where he would want to play because LeBron is his mentor, his idol,
right?
All of that stuff. He lives in Southern California. Who the hell doesn't want to play for the Lakers? Golden State makes the most sense, right? Because you have a player that you can trade that earns about 2/3 of what Ben Simmons makes, and that's in Andrew Wiggins, who's a good 3-and-D guy who was a teammate with Joel Embiid at Kansas. Yes, 7 years ago. And I reached out to Tom Keegan, who we worked together with at the Boston Herald, who actually, before he came to Boston, was working covering Kansas basketball and football. And he said their relationship was good back then. Now, again, that's 7-8 years ago. Wiggins was actually the first pick in that draft, Embiid the 3rd pick in the draft. We know Embiid's become a superstar, and Wiggins has been somewhat of a disappointment. Maybe Wiggins can be a key component in that trade. Maybe Golden State also trades the 2 players they drafted in the lottery 2 months ago, and then some other filler, some draft picks, and now you add Ben Simmons to Golden State, which would give them a unique lineup, right? Because if you have Ben Simmons and Draymond Green on the court with Klay Thompson and Steph Curry, that would be one of the most unique lineups in the history of basketball, right? Because you'd have the best shooter in the history of the sport in Steph Curry, one of the 5 best shooters I've ever seen in Klay Thompson, and then 2 guys who can't shoot. Like, that would be an odd, group, but maybe that could work. That seems to make the most sense. I think of the 3 teams in California that he wants to go to, that Golden State has the most to give Philadelphia, that Philadelphia would say, okay, maybe we're only getting 80, 85 cents on the dollar, but it's better than 50 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, it's funny, he has said three teams, and so people are speculating. It does seem though like that fourth team, Sacramento, is the team that wants him the most of those
Right.
of those teams in California. So he may have to be content with going to a place that nobody wants to go, basically basketball purgatory, Sacramento. But yeah, the Golden State thing is interesting.
What would Sacramento have to give to Philadelphia other than De'Aaron Fox,
They're
who
not going to do that. He's
they're
better
not going to
player
do
than
that?
Simmons, better
Yeah.
player.
I mean, I think Simmons' ceiling is higher than De'Aaron Fox's, but right now, De'Aaron Fox, we know, is a guy who, is totally invested, right? I mean, he's a baller, and Simmons just doesn't seem to fit into that mold. And they don't have other things to trade Philadelphia.
They have, I mean, they have Halliburton and Davion Mitchell. I
Yeah.
don't know that it's tough, with the Sixers, and this is the same issue with the Warriors trade, Sap, because the Warriors aren't going to want to trade one of their good veteran players for Simmons, except for Wiggins, who, he's fine, but the Sixers are, with Embiid, are trying to compete for a title. Getting young players doesn't really help them with that. So they're in a weird position where I feel like they'd almost need a third team to be involved with the trade.
Right.
A third team that's looking to completely rebuild, because pairing Embiid with, Wiggins and Kuminga and whoever else, say it's James Wiseman too, that doesn't put the Sixers in a place that they necessarily want to be, because it's the same issue where you're basically just relying on Joel Embiid to score an insane amount of points and hoping, that other guys can contribute consistently enough. And as we know, you can't really ask on young players to consistently contribute to teams that are trying to win a championship. So I don't know what the logical fit is or destination for Ben Simmons. And listen, he can say, I want to go to X, Y, and Z team, but the Sixers, they don't care. They're going to just try to maximize value. They're not trying to do him any favors right now. And Rich Paul, as powerful as an agent as he may be, doesn't have that much control over the situation, because it's not like Anthony Davis, when Anthony Davis wanted out of New Orleans, where he was like, the hot commodity in the NBA. A lot of teams straight up just don't want Ben Simmons right now.
Right. Well, I think that Rich Paul does have a little more say than you're leading on about, because he's such a powerful guy. You would think that Philadelphia is going to want to not piss him off, right? That wouldn't be the best move for future business. We've also heard that Tyrese Maxey, who's also a Clutch client, wants out as well from Philadelphia. So you'd be getting Simmons, Tyrese Maxey, and then whatever you get in return. Let me throw one other team out there. And again, I think it's pretty sure we can be pretty sure that it's probably going to be a Western Conference team, because generally when these superstar players get traded, they go to the other conference. What about Portland? And again, that's been the hot rumor. You brought it up months ago, because
Right.
Damian Lillard has talked about that he may want out, although now he's not, as much into that as he was, say, a couple months ago. Portland being involved as a third team, maybe it ends up with Portland getting Ben Simmons, and you get Dame Lillard with the 76ers.
Never going to happen. Not going to happen.
Okay.
It's just listen, at Sap, and I brought it up months ago before the playoffs started, because I thought, okay, it makes sense. Ben Simmons, has a lot of value. Portland can't sell it to their fan base. His
Right.
value is just too low to be able to trade Lillard, who we both did our top 10 a week or so ago, Sap. We both agreed Lillard's a top 10 player. And Ben Simmons, you have him as a top 20 player. Eventually, I have him as a top 40 player right now. Wow. And I just don't think it's sellable to the fan base right now in Portland. You're taking a guy who in Lillard, whose trade value is arguably at an all-time high, because he's coming off a great season, and trading him for a guy whose trade value is arguably an all-time low. That's just bad business. So right. I don't think it's going to happen, because I don't think the Blazers have Lillard under contract control. So they have no real reason to move on from him. And he seems relatively happy, at least for the moment. I just don't think Simmons is the guy that they want to pull the trigger on Lillard for. So, unfortunately for the Sixers, they're in a situation where they're trying to sell an asset that is just doesn't have as much value as it used to right now. So I think Portland would gladly do it for McCollum and other pieces. And honestly, Philadelphia might have to be happy with that at this point. I don't know who the best player they can get for Simmons is, Sap. If it's a straight up, 1-for-1 sort of swap, we're trying to get another all-star level player for him. I genuinely don't know who that player is, because again, Philadelphia is trying to compete for a title right now. They have Joel Embiid, who we talked about, Sap, another guy we looked at as a top 10 player, could be a top 3 player if he's ever, completely healthy and has his head on straight. But I don't know what they do, where they go from here. It's devolved into such a bad situation. And he's coming off such a poor performance, and the assets taken such a hit that it's like that's why this is so interesting, because it's like, where does he go? Because what team is willing to give a considerable price tag for a guy who's coming off of a really rough stretch here?
Well, I mean, if someone's coming off an injury, right, you take x-rays and say, okay, that Achilles or that knee is going to be fine in 8-10 months. So we'll wait for that particular player. We know what Brooklyn did. They waited a year for Kevin Durant. Well, worth it. You can't x-ray someone's head or heart. And those are the things that we're trying to figure out about Ben Simmons. It's almost like, you remember the pitcher, Rick Ankiel, who couldn't throw to the catcher. I mean, it almost feels similar to that. Like, okay, the ability's there, but there's something wrong and we don't know how to fix it. The thing is, though, if you go back to the beginning of last year when James Harden was moved, who was the best player that Houston got back in return for James Harden? It wasn't an all-star caliber player. So at times the team has to, take 80 cents on the dollar and get some assets, whether it be draft capital, young players, whatever the case may be. That's why I think Golden State makes the most sense. I mean, Andrew Wiggins is not as good as Ben Simmons, but I think you would get 18, 20 points per game from him. You'd get good defense. He would be a fine player in Philadelphia if you're able to get the 2 young players that they drafted in the first round. Yeah, they're developmental players at this stage, and you want to win now with Embiid. And then if you get draft picks, maybe that's the best that Philadelphia can do at this point. CJ McCollum, I've heard that rumor as well. I think he'd be a nice fit in Philadelphia. He's one of the best players of the last 10 years that never made an all-star game. I mean, that's kind of a backhanded compliment, I guess. But you get my point that there's no actual like 1-for-1 match unless it's Dame Lillard. But you're right. How does Portland justify to their fans, we just traded the most popular player in franchise history, a guy who leaves his heart on the floor every single night that the fans love, for a guy who looks like he doesn't give an F, so right. That's a tough one to sell.
Yeah. I think Golden State to me does make the most sense. I think internally they're a little divided as according to what I'm reading, because I think the Simmons thing with pairing him with Draymond Green does provide a lot of question marks with, the lack of shooting. I mean, certainly you have defense there. I kind of think it would work, but I get why there is some hesitancy there. As far as the Sixers and what the situation was with the Rockets last year when they traded James Harden, the difference is that the Rockets, once they traded Harden, they knew they were going to have to be in full rebuild mode. Right. So they were okay taking back picks and young assets and sucking, because they're in rebuild mode. The Sixers aren't going to just blow it up, because that would entail also trading Joel Embiid, which they're not going to do. So they're in a different situation because they don't want to waste these prime years of Embiid's career. And so, taking back young players and picks, it doesn't get Joel Embiid any better. It doesn't help maximize him and his talents. So they're in a tough spot right now. And, as far as Ben Simmons goes, again, I think Rich Paul again is a very powerful agent, but I think the Sixers are in such a unique position where they're really just trying to win right now and don't really want to do a whole rebuild thing, that they're not going to look at they don't care where he wants to go. They're going to just try to get the best value for him possible. But what that is right now is maybe 50 cents on the dollar at best.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many possibilities. And as is always the case, there'll be a surprise team in there that comes to the forefront. You go, geez, we weren't even thinking about them. Maybe someone like Denver, just going to throw them out there for whatever. And, we got Michael Porter Jr., who might be a nice asset. He's a young player, but he's obviously closer to becoming a star than the young players that Golden State just drafted. I mean, he's kind of establishing himself as a guy that you can expect to score 20, 22 points per game, which is a nice commodity in the NBA. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think Philadelphia, if they're smart, they want to get this thing done before camp, so it's not a distraction. And, you bring in whatever new players that you have to get involved with, and you go from there, because they should be a contending team. And you make a great point, because Embiid, as great as he is, I don't know how much longer his shelf life is, right? He's had a lot of injuries. We don't know from year to year what kind of shape he's in. Let me put it this way. I don't think he's going to play to 40 years old like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar did. I see Embiid, probably burning out at like 32, 33 years old, and that may be it, right? And then maybe he hangs around the league as a good center, but not a great center. I don't see Joel Embiid 10 years from now being the best center in basketball. Maybe in 5 years, and then I think he's going to be descending at that point.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and that's sort of the trajectory that a lot of big guys do tend to follow. Kareem's sort of an anomaly, that he was able to do it for 20 years. But yeah, I mean, I think Denver's an interesting team, Sap. I could see that potentially. I know that Minnesota has been very interested in Ben Simmons, but I don't think the Sixers are particularly interested in what Minnesota is throwing their way. So it's hard to say. I agree with you. It does seem likely that maybe like a mystery team will step up, maybe Toronto, but it seems like things with Siakam have gotten a little bit better there. The thing is, the Sixers aren't going to get an A grade when they make this trade, because they're going to have to take something down. And so if they did that trade with Portland for Lillard, they would have gotten an A+, because Lillard and Embiid seems like a perfect fit. It's just not going to happen. It doesn't make sense for Portland to do it. So we'll have to see, but it's interesting that the situation continues to deteriorate. I don't think Ben Simmons is doing himself any favors with the way he's gone about wanting to get traded, being non-communicative in the offseason and being sort of just completely missing in action. Doesn't really instill confidence in any team that potentially wants to trade for you. So I think he's continued to hurt his value more. And I get being upset with the Sixers, though I think he should be a little bit more upset with himself for how he played. But I think there's several ways to handle a trade request, and being public, going really public with it, and not being non-communicative like he has been, just makes it harder for the team to trade you, because they don't want to take a complete bath on a guy that they spent the number 1 pick on just a couple of years ago. So I don't think he's doing himself any favors either. It is interesting, Sap, that Joel Embiid's now come out too. I don't know if you saw this, and said that, he loves playing with Ben Simmons. This is all made up, but it seems like damage control to me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he may be trying to help the organization by bringing Simmons' value up a little bit so they can get a little bit more in return. Although that's probably doubtful as well.
Yeah, this is what Joel Embiid had to say on Twitter, Sap, responding to an article about Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid sort of falling out. And he said, "Stop using my name to push people's agendas. I love and hate drama. I love playing with Ben. Stats don't lie. He's an amazing player, and we all didn't get the job done. It's on me personally. I hope everyone is back, because we're good enough to win." And then he has subsequently said, "For my own experience, y'all have no idea how much this media makes up stuff for followers, and shame on you for believing them." And he kept going, and the rest is basically the same sort of thing. I don't know. Do you think the Sixers asked him to do this, Sep, or do you think he's just doing it himself?
They may have, if he had some time to kill. Who knows? I mean, we saw it. He said it after Game 7. Doc Rivers said it after Game 7, the stuff we talked about earlier. And then we heard through multiple reports and reliable reporters that Ben Simmons was not connecting with anybody in the Philadelphia 76ers front office, or even Coach Doc Rivers. So if that's all true, which I believe it was, then, we weren't hoodwinked. That's what happened.
Yeah. So you can't take that stuff back after you say it.
No.
He did say it. It was on camera. It was very public. Same with Doc Rivers. And so, yeah, that genie is out of the bottle. So we'll have to see, and we'll continue to follow this, because it does seem like he is the most likely notable player that's going to get moved before the season starts. And depending on where he goes, it could really shake up the landscape of the NBA. Certainly, if it's the Warriors, it makes them a whole lot more interesting. And I think, I don't necessarily know if it makes them a real threat to the Lakers in the West, but it moves them closer depending on what they give up, to me. And if I'm the Warriors, Sap, I'm seriously concerned about how much time I have left in that championship window with Steph and Clay, coming off of that injury, and that I'm really trying to maximize what those. I just don't see the point in them being a good team and you're trying to rebuild on the fly while they're also somewhat competitive with those guys, go all in. You don't have them for that much longer. Curry had a phenomenal year last year, but how many more years can you expect him to play at an MVP type level? And Klay Thompson, you just don't know what he's going to be like.
Yeah, I mean, he's missed the last 2 seasons with 2 different injuries, and Simmons, I think, would improve them. It would be an interesting fit. And if he's all in, I think he could fit beautifully with Curry and Klay Thompson because he's an outstanding passer. You could play him down in the low post. You could play Draymond out high. You'd have 2 great ball handlers who are also great defenders. And then you have the 2 sharpshooters. So that would be interesting. And again, by the time these young players develop for Golden State, Steph Curry is going to be 36 and Klay is going to be 34. And, not every player plays late into their 30s at a very high level.
Let me pose this question to you, Sap. If the Warriors were to trade for Ben Simmons and say it's the package that we sort of kicked around, Wiggins and some of the young players, Kuminga, maybe Wiseman, whatever, do they then turn around and potentially look to trade Draymond Green for maybe a more traditional scoring asset? Because they're worried about Simmons is, younger, obviously, than Draymond Green. It's a little bit redundant. Does that make any sense to you? If there's a second move then subsequently involved to maybe balance out the scoring a little bit, the shooting?
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. I'm a big Draymond fan. I think all of the things he does, he's such a unique player. And, there was a time where he wasn't a bad shooter. He nearly had a triple-double in Game 7 of the 2016 Finals. I think if Golden State had won that series, he would have been the MVP of that series. He had, I think it was 35, 12, and 9 in Game 7. He was the second-best player on the floor behind only LeBron James in that Game 7. He was certainly better than Steph and Klay Thompson in that game and in that series.
Yeah.
So
I think he was one of the best players on the Olympic team this past year.
He was. I mean, he's a guy like you don't want to let him go, and I think he's so close with Steph and Klay that I don't know if you break those guys up. There'd be redundancy there with Simmons, but again, now if you're playing each guy say 34 minutes, they don't have to be on the court all the time together, right? You have a lot of load management. The 14 minutes a night that Draymond Green's on the bench, you have Ben Simmons on the floor, vice versa, and maybe you play them together for whatever period of time. And then you've got games that they can miss and see how it goes with them on the court together. Simmons and Draymond are so versatile that they'll be able to fill in the gaps. I mean, when you get 2 shooters like that, you and I could probably be the 5th guy and it would still be pretty effective. So I wouldn't want to trade Draymond because I think he offers more value to the Warriors than he does on the open market because he's a unique skill set. He has to go to a team that's a contender unless he's part of the trade package. To get Simmons, Golden State has to send Draymond Green to Philadelphia. And look, Philadelphia could probably use a player like that, an enforcer, defensive guy who has championship DNA. I wouldn't want to move Draymond, though, because I think he means more to that team than he does to any other team in basketball.
Yeah, all the stuff I'm reading is just that they're worried about the redundancy there.
Right.
And I don't think that they would necessarily, if they got Simmons, would immediately look to trade Draymond, but I think they take a look at it for a month or so, see what works. And I could see them potentially moving him if it's sort of like I'd like to think what the Patriots would do. And getting rid of Draymond is like a cold-blooded move because, he's been part of all the success they've had there. And he's close with Steph and Klay, but potentially if you could move him for a piece that makes more sense, that puts you over the top, the best teams don't think about the sentimentality of it. And They would, so it depends how the Warriors are run. For years when they were ripping off championships, we heard their owners and their GMs bragging, oh, we're 1,000 miles ahead of every other team. We're thinking 10 steps forward. Everybody else is playing checkers. We're playing chess. And, that's sort of with these injuries has come to a halt a little bit and people are pushing back and they've made some questionable draft picks, key among them being the James Wiseman pick instead of LaMelo Ball. So it's interesting to see the direction that they decide to go. But, it's all speculation at this point, and we'll continue to talk about the Ben Simmons stuff as it progresses. But let's talk about another move that got made, a much more under the radar move. And that Rajon Rondo gets bought out of his contract, and he heads to the Los Angeles Lakers like every other old player in the league. So the average age of the Lakers continues to creep upwards. Sap, good move for the Lakers.
I think more than anything that Rondo's going to be a confidant for LeBron James. And look, Jared Dudley, who really hasn't been an impact player in the league for half a decade, he's more a decade. Was he ever an impact player? He was a good role player in his day, but the last few years he played in the Lakers.
Like he became a journeyman version of Udonis Haslem.
Exactly. He essentially was a coach wearing a uniform, right? I mean,
yeah.
And he was the closest person to LeBron James on the Lakers. And LeBron's always had kind of these guys that he's played with that aren't necessarily great players or guys that even play much, but he's close to. James Jones was like that in Miami and Cleveland, where, that was his guy. And James Jones just won NBA Executive of the Year with the Phoenix Suns. So I also think LeBron's also likes being close to these guys, because when he owns a team, he's, picking their brain, and maybe they're going to be part of the ownership group. Who knows? I mean, I'm going a little bit deeper than I probably should, but I think Rondo can serve as that, because how many guys in the league have the same basketball IQ as LeBron?
0.
3 or 4? Well, yeah, probably 0. But the closest is Rajon Rondo and Chris Paul. I think those are the 3 brightest guys in the league while on the court, right? I mean, they seem to see the game in a different level than everyone else. And it'd be nice for LeBron to have that type of veteran player with him. Now, again, Rondo can be sandpapered a lot. He can be an irritator, not a lubricator, and that can be a problem.
I don't know that a lot of players do like his personality.
No, I think they respect him. They respect his ability to play big in the playoffs, although he didn't play big in the playoffs last year, but they also respect his genius level approach to the game. I mean,
isn't it funny, Sep, that you saying, the guys who are the smartest players, Chris Paul, Rajon Rondo, they're both really good friends with LeBron James, but Paul and Rondo hate each other. And
I think a lot of their teammates grow tired of them. I'm just waiting. I mean, I know Chris Paul's first year in Phoenix was a wild success, but maybe give it another year, and maybe Devin Booker's going to look and say, okay, dude, I kind of figured this out on my own. You don't have to, keep on me all the time. And I'm sure Rondo, we saw he and Kawhi Leonard didn't hit it off. Although sometimes you can't really tell who's hitting it off or not hitting it off with Kawhi Leonard. But yeah, they can be, look, they're the smartest guy in the room, and they are not afraid to let you know about that. And that can be good for young players. Old players might just, roll their eyes. And certainly the Lakers are loaded with old players. But if this keeps LeBron happy, and he's got someone on the road that he can confide in, that can, break down film with him and whatever, then maybe that'll work. I'm interested in the dynamic with Rondo and Russell Westbrook. That could be
that won't be good.
That's going to be, I mean, that team is just going to be, fascinating to watch, right? I mean, Rondo's now the 13th guy on the team.
Right. So I'm saying on the court, does he help on the court at all, Zep?
If there's injuries, and I mean, they're really going to load manage him, right? I mean, they may just wheel him in for the playoffs, and if they think that he can help them. Look, he was pretty big with them 2 years ago. Well, last year in the bubble. I keep forgetting that the bubble was going on a year ago. I keep saying 2 years ago, but it was 11 months ago when the Lakers won a championship. So he was big in that, right? And I also think that Rondo could serve as kind of a confidant and big brother to Anthony Davis, because they played together in New Orleans, they played together in the Lakers, and that's when Anthony Davis was at his best. They're both Kentucky guys, and maybe Rondo's there to just make sure that Anthony Davis is focused. I hear that Anthony Davis is working with a trainer, has a chef, is taking conditioning, nutrition much more seriously than ever before. That's something I talked about at the end of the season, that to be the great player that Anthony Davis can be, he's got to step it up to that level in terms of conditioning, nutrition, and really being in the best shape possible. And he seems to be following my advice. He can thank me later for that. But
that's very nice. He should maybe give you a tip, a financial tip would be nice.
That, and when they win a championship ring, I would like a ring. That would be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, why not? Then I can sell
reasonable.
The ring for financial gain.
So.
Yeah, why not? I want the real ring too, not the one that they hand out to the guys in the mailroom. I want a real ring. But I think that could be something as well. He'll be a player, coach, that type of thing. But I keep thinking of that with Rondo, and I keep thinking every place he goes, it's going to be that, and it hasn't always worked. It didn't work in Atlanta. They got rid of him right away. It didn't work with the Clippers, but maybe it works because of LeBron, because LeBron is a lubricator. more than an irritator. So he can get this all to work.
It's interesting too. I saw a report today, Sap, that Anthony Davis really did not like playing with Dennis Schroeder, and didn't like the looks that Dennis Schroeder gave him.
Yep.
When we comparing players, we'd say the guy who's most similar in the NBA to Rondo is Dennis Schroeder. So that kind of seems weird too, because he did seem like he liked playing with Rondo, but not Schroeder. So I don't really know what to make of the whole situation.
Who the hell knows? But Rondo has more cachet than Schroeder because he's got now 2 championships. He's been to 4 or 5 All-Star games. I think he's a borderline Hall of Famer, right? And they're both Kentucky guys, and I think that means something. 6 years apart. Rondo got out of Kentucky in 06, and
Davis not even the same
years
coach,
later,
but
not even the same coach, but same school. So there's that brotherhood, and sure. I think that and look, that we've all worked with people who are similar, and we just like one and didn't like the other. Like it just didn't.
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense. I mean, there's even like you can look at. I'll use 2 radio hosts in this city, Mike Felger and Kirk Minahan. In some ways similar in that they're kind of the contrarian. They can be DBs, but we like Felger because he's a likable DB. We don't like Minahan because he's an unlikable DB, right? You get what I'm saying? So yeah, I think I get it. That can happen. You can almost say like, I don't know, I just like this guy better. So they may like Rondo better. Look, this experiment is going to be either a huge success or it is going to be a clusterfuck. I mean, because you've got so many personalities there, and the guy that's going to have to make this work is LeBron James, because he's the guy with the cachet to make it work with Westbrook and Rondo and Carmelo and Anthony Davis and Dwight Howard. I mean, you've got 6 Hall of Famers, right? I mean, if you include Rondo as a Hall of Famer, and Lord knows if Kevin Love ever gets bought out, he'll be going to play with the Lakers too. So, it's almost like they have 2. They're deeper than They're deeper than the Dodgers and the Rams right now. But I don't know how that works in basketball. If Rondo's your 13th guy, how much is he going to play?
Right. And the one thing that's going to hold, well, I guess 2 things, they're sort of going hand in hand with the Lakers. That's going to hold them back is age and injury. Yeah. Again, those kind of go hand in hand. When you're older, you're more likely to get hurt. That's just the natural order of things. Rondo certainly doesn't help with the age or injury aspect of it. He's had injuries throughout his career, and he's an older guy too. But again, like you said, Seth, when you're talking about adding guys at the end of the roster, there's no real risk to it for the Lakers. No. So, I mean, I think it's a good move. The only risk is I don't know what how many guys they have on their roster, if they have more roster space. So I don't know if there's an issue of if a guy comes available who would be a better player for them, a guy gets bought out down the line.
I think they have 2 roster spots still available. Rondo literally is
that's good.
Yeah, Rondo's the 13th guy. I could be the 14th guy and you could be the 15th guy. And then when Kevin Love becomes available, they'll throw him in there. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if that happened. That's what they've done. It is really LeBron's Isle of Misfit Toys. That's what it feels like. Like he's trying. Look, I know that 2 weeks ago, Paul Pierce said, well, if he doesn't win a championship with this team, he's not a top 5 player. I think if he wins a championship with this team, his legacy goes up because he's bringing guys together that oftentimes don't work with everyone. Like, how's this a feather in LeBron's cap? If they win a championship and Russell Westbrook's a key contributor to that championship run, LeBron can say, look, Durant couldn't win with him. Harden couldn't win with him. Bradley Beal couldn't win with him. Paul George couldn't win with him, but I won with him. And at the end of his career, that would be a feather in LeBron's cap. If you like down the road when you're comparing LeBron and Durant, and I don't think they'll ever be compared because LeBron's better, but you could say, look, LeBron won with Russell Westbrook and Durant had to leave Oklahoma City because of Russell Westbrook. Now I get 5 years ago, Westbrook was at a different point in his career than he is now. But my greater point is, there's a lot of moving parts with this Lakers team. And he's the guy who's going to have to make it work more than the coaching staff because he's the guy that can still command the room. Yeah, well, no one gives a rat's ass about the coaching staff for any team that LeBron's on. Yeah, I mean, I think any title that he wins, it only adds to his legacy at this point. I mean, I don't think that it doesn't make sense to take away from somebody for winning a championship, even if they are, in my opinion, the favorites. And I know Vegas has them as the second best to the Nets, which, you can't really fault Vegas for that. That makes sense to me also.
But yeah, I think it certainly would add to his legacy if he wins a championship.
Yeah,
I don't know how you would argue otherwise.
I want to pose this question to people. When exactly was Michael Jordan not the favorite to win the championship? I mean, when he won the 6 championships, he was favorite every single year going into the
Right.
year and when they got to the finals. So, I mean, that's what basketball is. This isn't, Eli Manning and the New York Giants going 9-7 or 10-6 and coming out of the wild card round and upsetting, the Packers in the NFC Championship game and then the Patriots in the Super Bowl. Basketball's a little bit different. You kind of get the feeling of who the real contenders are. I mean, even Milwaukee, who was the 3rd seed last year in the Eastern Conference, we were both very high on them. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe we're the 2 smartest guys in the room. Like today, I'm sitting here not shocked that the Milwaukee Bucks are the champions. I picked them to win the East. I thought that they would lose to the Lakers in the finals, and I think the Lakers were healthy and got there, the Lakers would have beat them because they had the right matchups against Milwaukee. But Milwaukee winning the title was not a shock. They had who I think now is the best player in the league and 2 really good, star players that are perfect fits for Giannis and a defensive minded team and a physical team. And how many times have we said this, Jet? The last 3 NBA champions all played outstanding defense and were big. Toronto, the Lakers, Milwaukee. What do they have in common? Physical teams play defense. That's still the way to win championships. No matter what sport you're talking about, it's still very important.
Yeah. I mean, I thought Milwaukee was the second best team in the East. I thought Brooklyn would beat them. Brooklyn fell apart health wise. And, I thought the Lakers were going to be the finals too, and they fell apart health wise too. So it happens. But yeah, Milwaukee, I mean, still talking about they were a team with the 2-time and at the time reigning MVP.
Right?
And they added in the offseason to get better with Drew Holiday. So yeah, not a shock. No one comes completely out of left field in basketball to win a championship. That never happens.
No.
It's just not the nature of the sport. I mean, if it was 1-game elimination in the playoffs, okay, maybe, but they're all 7-game series, and usually the cream rises to the top in that sort of circumstance. All right, Sap. Well, I think that's going to do it for us for this episode of the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We are again presented by Full Press Coverage, so check out their website and make sure you check out our Twitter pages, John Sap 25, Jet Stryer, for all the latest musings and updates in the show, different opinions. We don't just talk about basketball on Twitter. We talk about, I talk about pop culture a lot. Sap talks about random old movie references and TV show references too. I'll give you our thoughts about what's going on in the NFL and the whole Cam Newton being cut situation. So, our Twitters are filled with entertainment. So check those out. And if you're not already checking out our podcast on YouTube, please do so. YouTube.com/JetStryer. And the podcast is wherever podcasts are found. Just type in the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, and we come right up. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you down the road. See ya.